Hi, everyone. Welcome to PPAN's February webinar, Inside the Colorado Legislature, Pollinator Protection in the 2026 session. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers today. My name is Anna Gray Anderson, and I am the Community Engagement Manager for People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN for short. For those of you who aren't familiar with our webinar series, we usually host a monthly event, so be sure to sign up for our e-news and check out our events calendar to keep up to date with all of our upcoming events, and we can put these links in the chat for you. And before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about us. So like I said, we are People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN, the host of this webinar. We focus a lot on making Colorado a safe haven for all who live here, from people to pollinators. We do this through grassroots advocacy, education, and outreach, kind of like this webinar. We do a lot of policy work, like some of the work we'll talk about today. We also do community mobilization and habitat creation work. A good example of that is our Habitat Fund grants program, which is based on the sales of the pollinator license plate, and that goes towards creating pollinator safe spaces while promoting community mobilization. And I did just want to emphasize the significance of the Protect Pollinators license plate. PPAN championed the legislation that created this plate, and the majority of the donations for the plate go directly to that Habitat Fund. So by getting a plate, you'll be contributing directly to getting more native plants in the ground, which leads to more pollinators. And again, we'll put this link in the chat. So we're really grateful to have an amazing lineup of speakers today. To orient us a little bit, we'll start off with a brief overview of the session, and then we'll dive into three of PPAN's priority bills this year. But first, wanted to introduce Becky Long of Siegel Long Public Affairs. Siegel Long is PPAN's contract lobbyist. And Becky joined Siegel Long in 2016, and in April 2022, she joined as a partner. She began her work in public policy with the Colorado Environmental Coalition, working in Colorado water policy, and later served as the advocacy director for Conservation Colorado. With strong experience in a range of natural resource issues, as well as in political and electoral work, she is now putting those skills to work on behalf of a host of clients. Becky has led campaigns to set ambitious carbon reduction goals for Colorado, pass generational change for oil and gas regulations, incentivize the electric vehicle market in Colorado, pass nation-leading protections for student borrowers, and increase consumer debt protections. Becky has expertise in building coalitions, policy development, and in lobbying at the legislature to secure wins on behalf of progressive issues. Our next speaker, some of you probably know, and that's Joyce Kennedy of PPAN, our amazing executive director. So Joyce has worked as an environmental professional for consulting firms, nonprofits, and the National Park Service. Prior to her work as a pollinator advocate, Joyce's environmental work focused on rivers in New England, where she was also involved in establishing Connecticut's statewide ban on pesticides on K-8 school grounds. And Joyce will be speaking on House Bill 1132 today, which is about native plants in the state. And we're also really happy to have Mark Searles with us today. Mark is the Colorado State Coordinator at Project Coyote. In this role, he helps to expand the organization's core programs and campaigns throughout Colorado. Mark's diverse career journey has taken him from trading stocks to living in a village in sub-Saharan Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer to embracing the role of a stay-at-home dad and championing wildlife advocacy. Throughout it all, he has followed his heart and passions, making decisions that reflect his deep commitment to making a positive impact. And in the process, he has discovered that open, honest communication is one of the most powerful tools for ensuring a healthier planet for future generations. Mark also has passions for wildlife photography and wildlife advocacy. He focuses on combating some of the most pressing issues facing carnivores today, including the killing of native carnivores through poison and unlimited hunting and trapping for fur. as well as promoting education on peaceful coexistence with these vital animals. He believes firmly in the power of people to create change and is dedicated to guiding those who want to stand up for wildlife and speak out for the protection of our wild spaces. And Mark will be presenting on Senate Bill 62, which is about rodenticide use in the state. And then finally, we'll hear from Lena Frage with the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. Lena is an attorney and policy advocate at NRDC, where she works to reduce or eliminate the use of pesticides that are harmful to human health and wildlife. Prior to joining NRDC, Lena was the Honors Attorney Fellow at EPA Region 10, where she brought administrative enforcement actions against violators of air, waste, pesticide, and toxic statutes. Lena holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science and policy from California State University, Long Beach, and earned her JD from UCLA Law School. And Lena will be talking about Senate Bill 65, which is about pre-coated insecticide seeds. And before we get started, and as a reminder, please stay muted. Leave your questions in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation, time permitting. We're also recording this presentation, and we'll post it to our YouTube channel soon. There'll be an email coming out to all the registrants with that link. And then we also encourage you to make a donation today so that PPAN can continue to host this free webinar series. This donation will really support our education, advocacy, and habitat creation efforts this year. And a donation of any size really does make a difference, so thank you for your consideration. And another way to support this work is by getting that beautiful pollinator license plate. We can put these links in the chat to make it easy for you all. And all you, Joyce.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks for everyone for attending today. When PPAN thinks about which policies we want to bring forward, we always ask the question, what's going to serve pollinators and people and help to move Colorado forward to stronger protections? And to answer that this year, we are working with Representative Froelich and Senator Kipp on House Bill 1132, increasing native pollinator habitat on Colorado state lands. Change the slide, please. This bill builds directly on the momentum created by the 2024 Colorado Native Pollinating Insect Health Study. And that's the study that PPAN helped champion through earlier legislation. And the study has resulted in the creation of a new group at Colorado Parks and Wildlife to lead some of this work, and the state now recognizing invertebrates as wildlife. The pollinator insect study identified habitat loss and the decline of diverse native plants as primary drivers of pollinator decline in Colorado. And we know pollinators are struggling, but not just because of one single factor, multiple factors, including the steady reduction and fragmentation of habitat that pollinators depend on. So since native plants form the foundation of that habitat, without them, pollinators lose both food and shelter. The study has provided us with a valuable framework for state-level action by offering multiple recommendations on how Colorado can lead in pollinator protection. And this bill takes the next logical step by seeking affordable solutions to increase the use of native plants on state lands. And the bill is based on the recommendations from the study. We think that of native plants really as a solution to so many things in the landscape, since they help to combat biodiversity loss, they reduce the spread of invasive species, they improve soil health and watershed protection. They also increase resilience in the face of drought. So the list goes on and on of the benefits of native plants. And overall, the study gives us a great roadmap that we can keep coming back to for guidance. And we're thinking of ways to implement it. Change the slide, please. House Bill 1132 proposes that certain key state agencies, including the Department of Transportation, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Personnel and Administration, prioritize the use of native plants on state-owned lands when feasible. Importantly, we recognize that agencies are already doing a lot of good work in this realm. Across departments, staff are incorporating native plants into restoration, and they're adjusting land management practices. But this legislation will codify and align those existing efforts and push a little bit to ensure there's continued leadership in this realm. And at a time of significant budget challenges, and I'm sure Becky will touch on that, the bill is written with a lot of flexibility so agencies can absorb this work without really tapping into too many additional funds and using their existing resources whenever possible. Change the slide, please. The bill supports implementation in several practical ways. First, it directs agencies to coordinate their purchasing of plants and plant material. By working together, agencies can hopefully create more demand for the natives, strengthen supply chains, and reduce costs through bulk purchasing. Second, it incorporates land management practices recommended in the study, including thoughtful mowing and grazing, timing them to better protect pollinator habitat. Third, it calls for training to build agency staff's basic knowledge of pollinators and habitat management so that best practices are integrated into their everyday maintenance operations. Fourth, it directs the Office of the State Architect to prioritize sustainable pollinator-friendly practices on state properties. And finally, it directs CSU Extension to conduct a statewide study of native plant supply and demand, identify gaps in that, and recommend strategies for the future. CSU Extension is well suited for this work, so it seemed like a really good option to include them in this bill. Unfortunately, there's currently no funding for this study, so it will only proceed if that funding is secured, but we hope to work really hard to find funding so that can go forward. Slide change, please. So the bill, just in summary, the bill has been introduced and it will have its first hearing tomorrow in the House Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. And so actions of the moment can be to write or call your legislators today, or really in the weeks to come. Hopefully we will make it through committee tomorrow. You can also, if you're part of an organization with a logo, if you'd like to be supportive of this policy, we would love to include your logo on our fact sheet. And really with that, we are going to be leaving all questions to the end. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to pass it off to Becky Long now.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, and thanks for bearing with me. As I left the building, I was met with people carrying literal armfuls of puppies and then someone with a leaf blower. So it was a little bit of a bad moment to come off mute, but a good moment for puppies and leaf blowers, mostly the puppies. So thanks for having me. It's nice to see folks and nice to see some old and new faces alike. I'll start with my caveat that Melissa Ordelheid on my team has been really point on working with PPAN and tracking all the things for y'all. So if you have really specific questions, I may need to get back with you. She's out sick this week. So unfortunately, you get the B team of me who's playing catch up on some stuff. But I think I know all the things I'm talking about today. So really nice to see you all. I think I'm just here to give a little bit of a overview of kind of what's happening in the Capitol and kind of the overarching dynamic. So if that sounds right, I'll launch into that quickly, and then apologies that I'll have to leave at 12:30. But if folks have questions that don't get answered, you should feel free to send us an email and we can absolutely track more info down. So thank you, and sorry to have to be in two places at once today. So this year, as Joyce spoke to, I think the big overarching rain cloud discussion, whatever, of the building is the state budget. Colorado has a very complicated budget in good years, and in bad years, it is even worse. The passage of HR 1 last year, or the One Beautiful Bill Act, really complicated our budget even further because Colorado's tax code is mirrored closely with the federal tax code. So legislators came back for an August special session and made a number of changes to try to undo some of that damage. But effectively, when that federal bill was signed, we went from having a balanced budget to being over $1 billion out of whack on our budget for this year. So it really threw a lot of chaos into Colorado when that passed. So the legislature is currently having to cut another $500 million to $1 billion, kind of depending on the forecast, and are working really hard to do that as that impacts our bills. It's things like fiscal notes become really hard, where typically a couple $100,000 or a little bit of money to fund a study is something we can come by. We were just not able to do that this year. So we're having to be really creative and thoughtful about how we structure policies and having to play a lot of defense. So that's kind of the overarching theme of this year, is that the budget is very bad. I think the other thing that's just caused some maybe interest, chaos, unexpected events is that we've had quite a few changes in the makeup of the legislature since November. Obviously, we lost a huge friend of pollinators and champion and Senator Faith Winter in November. And that is deeply sad for lots of reasons, but she was one of our stalwart champs on these issues over the years. And always down to push on these issues and really champion them. With her passing, we saw William Lindstedt move to the Senate. That opened up a vacancy for his seat in the House. So Kenny Wen has now been seated there in Broomfield. We then saw Shannon Byrd announce in December that she was going to resign her seat while she's running for Congress in Congressional District 8. That opened up a seat that has since been filled by Lori Goldstein. We saw a number of Republican legislators over the fall and winter also leave, either for other jobs or different and assorted reasons. So we've had a handful of new Republicans. And just about 10 days ago, Senator Daphne Michelson-Janae announced that she is also leaving the legislature. That was effective as of the 13th of February, and there's now a vacancy in her Senate district. That vacancy hearing, I think, is tonight. So we may have a new member by the end of the day. So there's just been a lot of moving parts and kind of musical chairs of members. It doesn't change the makeup of how many Dems versus Republicans are in the legislature. It just changes some of the key members of committee. So we've been doing some work to educate a new member who maybe started the day before. So we've got great folks like Lori Goldstein who are really getting up to speed. I think are going to be great on these issues, but are learning the entire lay of the land of the legislature at the same time. And so we're doing a lot of work to educate those members and check in. So lots of that. Hopefully after this last vacancy, we will have some pretty steady and stable members through the end of this session. And that brings us to the next thing that's kind of really over all of our heads and conversations, which is that the entire House has to run for re-election every 2 years. So they're all running. About a third of the Senate is up for re-election this year, and they are all running. We have open seats for governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and state treasurer. So there are a number of dynamics that brings to the building. For state treasurer, we have 2 current legislators running. So how that race factors in is like a constant conversation on bills with Brianna Titone and Jeff Bridges. Even if it's kind of in the background, it's part of their calculation. We've got folks running for Congressional District 8. We have folks who are looking to run from House to Senate. So just the political perceptions of bills is really heightened right now because it is an election year. And it is an election year that is likely to be more of a blue wave year, that we will probably see a lot of pressure for Dems to turn out and push back against the current federal administration here in Colorado. So a lot of posturing, a lot of political speak, a lot of how does this fit in a campaign setting kind of thinking going on. that does not always lead to the best policymaking in my experience. It can sometimes make those conversations really complicated and make what might be a normal, like, yes, no, I'm good on that in a non-election year. Sometimes it just raises the stakes on it because somebody talked to a voter the other day who really cared about that issue and now they're really thinking about it in a new way. So that is all to say, there's just a lot happening this year in the building. And a lot of really hard issues being tackled this year because of those things. So some of the big issues we're seeing move are around social media protections for young people, immigration status, and what the state can and can't do to protect immigrants here in Colorado. Some of those big top line issues that you see on the national news are dominating conversations here in Colorado. Data centers and AI and all of those things are playing out. And it's just a very busy year already. And I've had a number of conversations with people who are like, it's January or now it's February, and it kind of feels like April. And I gotta say, it kind of feels like April, both weather-wise and in the building at the Capitol. So hopefully that covers things. If there's more I should weigh in on, Joyce or others, let me know. But really appreciate y'all. And I guess my TLDR of it is that I think that both gives us opportunities to be creative and on issues where people are like, yeah, I like that. And it doesn't cause those complicated political feelings. A lot of times you can really move stuff through kind of under the radar. So that gives me I think it gives us opportunities for some of the things we're working on here. And also maybe challenges for other things.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was a great overview. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So in that case, we will pass it over to Mark now.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm Mark Searles, and I was the Colorado State Coordinator. Now I'm the Colorado and Northern Rockies Coordinator for Project Coyote, and I appreciate everyone attending today. And if you haven't engaged yet on Senate Bill 62, there's still plenty of time to do so. But I'll give you a brief background on what it is and why it's important. We did have our Senate Ag Committee hearing last Thursday, but there has not been a vote yet. The bill started out as a full prohibition of all anticoagulant rodenticides, as well as bromethalin and zinc phosphide, and we also included glue traps. So I'm going to focus specifically on the second generation anticoagulants and glue traps. I will say SGARs instead of the full name of the second gen anticoagulants from here forward. So just know that's what I'm talking about. But the main purpose of the bill and why we brought it forward is because of the impacts that rodenticides as a whole and glue traps have on our children, pets, and wildlife. And when we have human exposures to any rodenticide, it's about 70% of those are children 5 and under, because of curious hands, and everyone who has children or been around children knows that the first thing that happens when a small child finds something, it goes directly in their mouth, and that includes if they have access to rodenticides. In Colorado, we've also seen a number of cases of all rodenticide exposure in pets, but specifically anticoagulant rodenticides cause severe harm to our pets. And just like the name implies, they're an anticoagulant, and that can cause a major vet bill and potential death when a pet consumes them. And when we're talking about children and pets, those cases of exposures are most often, especially with children, always going to be a direct exposure. With pets, it's most often a direct exposure to the poison itself, which differs from how wildlife are affected from them. And then glue traps are often used irresponsibly by consumers, placed in areas where children, pets, and wildlife can get their hands on them. And just as the name implies, they're glue traps. Once you are stuck, then you're not going to easily remove that. And speaking with wildlife rehabbers, including Jack Murphy from Urban Wildlife Rescue, he told me a story about rescuing a raccoon who had a glue trap on each one of his paws. And so you getting these eliminated completely from the environment would be ideal, but at least out of the hands of consumers is a giant leap forward to prevent any of these harms to the affected groups. And with wildlife and anticoagulant rodenticides, they can have a wide impact, including owls, hawks, foxes, bobcats, mountain lions, are snakes, and are exposed. And even there are studies done with trout being exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides. But what happens is once the carnivore eats a eschar, it then bioaccumulates in their body, and that bioaccumulation can cause immune system issues. It can even affect reproduction. And we've had a study here in 2015 on Denver metro area coyotes, and all of the coyotes that were tested in that study were found to be exposed to anticoagulants. So that's not an anomaly. When we look at other research done throughout the country and the world, we see high rates of exposure, whether that's with owls or coyotes or mountain lions as well. That sometimes it's up to 100%, but in the 70, 80, 90% of tested subjects are found to be exposed to them. And so when we look at, well, if we're going to remove glue traps or we're going to remove anticoagulant rodenticides, what are our alternatives? And so first I want to take a step back and say that any lethal method to use on rodents is always treating the symptom. It's never actually treating the problem. And the problem is can be solved by having better sanitation, whether that's at home or in our cities as a whole. We've seen in New York City, they employed their rat czar a few years ago, and they had a program to get 100% of the trash off of the streets and containerized. And once they did that, they saw a 60% reduction in the number of rat sightings in the city. So really kind of common sense ways to reduce the need for any kind of lethal control. It also helps our mental health to be in a cleaner environment, and then with that also not seeing rodents because of an unsanitary environment. For homeowners or owners of buildings, then our first line of defense should always be exclusion. And that's basically sealing up all of the entry points that a rodent can get through. A mouse can get through a dime-size hole, and a rat can get through a quarter-size hole. So it's imperative to make sure that any structure that we don't want rodents in, that we seal all of those holes. If you are going to use any kind of lethal control, snap traps and electronic traps are still available, and they don't pose those same risk that poisons do or glue traps do. And then, when working either at home as an individual or with a professional, integrated pest management should be prioritized. And what that is, it goes through the sanitation part, it goes through the exclusion measures, and poisons through a professional should always be the last resort, and we should never start with them, because even when we look on websites for companies like Terminix and others, they always say that the sanitation exclusion is the #1 priority before we should move to poisons. And with glue traps, the CDC also recommends not to use them because when a rodent gets stuck to one of these traps, they're afraid they will urinate and defecate, and CDC recommends not to use them because that urination and defecation can lead to disease transmission to humans. So, like I said, we had our hearing in the Senate Ag last Thursday, and there was some good and some bad and a lot of long, I guess. And so the good was we did have wonderful support from our environmental and wildlife organizations. We even had Terminix, the largest pest control operator in the country, in support, as well as the Colorado Department of Agriculture. So it was great to have a wide variety of voices showing support for these restrictions on the use of rodenticides and glue traps. The bad was, well, it lasted about 3 hours or over that, and there was a lot of misinformation and confusion, primarily because we had introduced an amendment or 2 amendments before the hearing, and some folks were still testifying on what the original language of a full prohibition was going to do, and wasn't up to speed on what the amendments were actually allowing. And because of that confusion, they decided that it would be best to delay the vote on Senate Bill 62. We do not have that vote scheduled yet, but most likely will be next week. And we're confident that we will make it out of committee and have a chance on the Senate floor, and then hopefully moving into the House within the next couple of weeks. So I appreciate your time listening to me on this subject, and you can always feel free to reach out to me with any further questions on this, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And now we'll pass it over to Lena.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, let me share my screen. Thanks so much for hosting me, PPAN. My name is Lena Frage. I use she, her pronouns. And like Anna Grace said, I'm an attorney and policy advocate at the NRDC, where I work on trying to reduce or eliminate the unnecessary use of pesticides, particularly systemic insecticides in this class of neurotoxic insecticides called neonicotinoids, or neonics. So today I'm just going to walk you through briefly the harms of neonics and introduce our coalition, The Seed We Need, as well as the bill that was recently introduced. And we have a hearing coming up tomorrow, our first committee hearing. So I can talk a little bit more about some possible ways for y'all to get more involved if you're interested. So my work and this bill targets systemic insecticides more broadly, but also, like I mentioned, neonicotinoids. These are among the most potent insecticides ever created, and they're deployed on the largest scale in US history. And right now in Colorado, they are showing up in our groundwater, our surface water, they're in our bodies, and they are pretty much ubiquitous in our environment. And the primary reason for that is because of their wasteful and unnecessary use as a seed treatment. And that's what this picture is. It's not an AI photo. This is an actual picture of these fluorescent coatings on crop seeds that kind of look like scary Skittles to me. And I'm going to dig in a little bit more about why these are so scary. So neonics are systemic insecticides, which means that they get taken up by the plant, especially when they're used as a seed treatment, and they can make the whole plant toxic. So its roots, its fruit, its pollen, its nectar, all of it will get absorbed and become toxic. And this is fine generally if there's actually a pest that is being targeted, but the problem with seed treatments is that they are used by default, meaning they are automatically applied to nearly all corn seed and many other field crop seeds in Colorado. And they're super water soluble, so they very easily migrate because only a super tiny bit of the chemicals actually get absorbed by target plants, about 2 to 5% of it. So this means the other 95% just stays in the soil where it can persist for years and migrate to other non-target plants, wildlife, and nearby water bodies. And they're super duper toxic. They're very toxic to insects, especially our pollinators and particularly bees. And this graph just shows the scale of the neonic problem that we're dealing with. So just to explain this graph a little bit, the light blue bar is the harmfulness to insects that is attributable to neonics. And that dark blue bar is that of all other insecticides combined. So that is why my work in our campaign and the Seed Act aims to reduce the size of that light blue bar. And we're already seeing neonics in water bodies, which raises concerns for our aquatic ecosystems. We're seeing widespread neonic pollution in Colorado. We actually commissioned a report in July of last year that looked into public water data and found that neonics are in our groundwater and our surface water. There was even one monitoring well that found neonics 100 times over the chronic benchmark for harm to aquatic life. And unfortunately, conventional water treatment does not filter out neonics, and that's a major exposure pathway for humans, but also for so much other life that we see in our ecosystems, like our pollinators. The scary fact that I like to share is that one neonic-treated corn seed contains enough active ingredient to kill 250,000 bees. They kill bugs by attacking their nervous system, basically making them twitch uncontrollably before dying. And they're called neonics because they are new nicotine-like substances. So they literally attach to the receptor sites in nerves. And of course, if these chemicals are harmful to our bees, then they're absolutely harmful to other insect life, which affects the food chain, right? Most birds are insectivorous, so birds are getting starved by neonics. But even birds that directly consume treated seeds, we're seeing problems because neonics can accumulate in the liver and harm both adult birds and chicks' immune systems. And a recent study demonstrated that low-level neonic exposure can not only starve songbirds, but delay migration, decrease reproductive success. And there have also been a couple studies that have made the connection between neonics and birth defects in deer, including strange things going on with their organs and deformed jaws. There's also a study in Minnesota that found neonics in deer all throughout the state. So not just in areas with agriculture, but even in more remote areas. So it really just highlights the widespread nature of these uses and just how far these chemicals can travel. And that should worry us because deer are not the only big mammals that are impacted by neonics, right? We are also big mammals that are impacted by neurotoxic chemicals. And we know that neonics on farms, as well as seed treatment facilities, can raise a pretty significant workplace hazard. There was a recent study that found that hundreds of people have been acutely poisoned by neonics. Some of those poisonings were fatal. But chronic exposures are also a concern. CDC research found that about half of the US population is regularly exposed to neonics, and they know that through a biomonitoring study that actually found neonics in people's urine, or the breakdown of those pesticides in people's urine. And a recent study also found neonics in over 95% of 171 pregnant women, with the highest levels in Hispanic women. And what was really scary about that study was that over the 4 years, those levels were increasing. So pregnant women were getting more and more exposed over those 4 years. And those exposure levels are concerning because studies suggest that neonics may increase the risk of developmental and neurological damage in humans. Even though a lot of that science is basically what I would say in its infancy right now, we think that we're probably just going to see more and more of this research coming out. But similar to what we saw in deer, those studies are really just showing that neonic exposure is associated with very similar symptoms. So given all these harms, right, to our ecosystems, to our water, to our bodies, are neonic seed treatments worth it for agriculture? The answer is no. It turns out that neonics do not benefit farmers economically, especially for our pollinator-dependent farmers who are experiencing firsthand just the impact of these mass pollinator die-offs that we've been seeing over the years. But even for our non-pollinator-dependent farmers, there are studies that show that neonics provide no economic benefit for farmers on average, and yet they struggle to actually find seeds without systemic insecticides. So they're oftentimes left without much of a choice. And The big reason for this is because the market is controlled by a very small handful of multinational corporations that are depriving farmers of these choices and options. And of course, these are choices and options that could not only benefit our water, our wildlife, our own health, but even farmers' bottom lines. And so our proposal is to create a model through the Seed Act in Colorado that would open up that market and allow neonics and systemic insecticides more generally just to be used more strategically rather than prophylactically. So in response to all of this, the bill that was recently introduced is the SEED Act, the Strengthening Economic and Environmental Decisions Act. It would allow for neonics to be used more intentionally, right? So it would create, it's called a need-based model that would restrict the use of these pesticides to only when they are necessary. So only when there is actually a demonstrated pest problem. You can kind of see it functioning as like a prescription. So it's like going to the doctor. If a farmer wants to use a neonic, a treated seed, they would just need to demonstrate that there is a pest problem and they can get a waiver or a certificate that would allow them to make that purchase. And so by creating this model, it would also open up that seed market and just give farmers more options. And we think this will actually result in about 80 to 90% reduction of use in the state. And the reason we think that is because that is similar to the drop that we saw in other jurisdictions like Quebec, which is the model that we base this this whole model off of. And those are the drops that we saw there. In Quebec, neonics used to be used universally on corn seed, but after a need-based program, it dropped to virtually zero. So again, just really, really showing that these pesticides are not needed. So if you're looking to learn more about our campaign, the seed we need, you want to learn more about any of the science that I've discussed today and more, you can scan that QR code. It'll take you to our campaign website. You can find links for so many more resources covering the impacts of neonics, along with a button where you can sign up and join our campaign. And if you're looking for ways to get even more actively involved, in addition to, of course, staying in touch with me, you can shoot me an email, you can sign up on our website, or if you know folks that you think I should connect with that might, this story might resonate with. We're also looking for folks who want to be involved in our hearing this Thursday. So if you are interested in providing testimony, that would be wonderful. So you can provide written testimony and you can provide in-person or virtual testimony as well. It's basically your opportunity to share your perspective on the proposed legislation. So you'd be writing in support of the legislation, obviously, but it would need to be, something more anecdotally, right? If you have a connection or a personal experience with these pesticides, maybe you really care about pollinators, or you're a farmer and you've struggled to find access to, pesticide-free seeds. Or, you're a beekeeper and you're experiencing these losses and you're concerned about this widespread contamination of neonics. Your story matters and we would absolutely love to get you involved. So if that's something that interests you, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation. I can help you walk through a script or kind of help you with thoughts on what to say in written testimony. Just feel free to let me know. Our hearing is tomorrow. So give me a call. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. All right. And yeah, thank you to all of our speakers. This was a great overview of all the bills we're focusing on. And now we'll just have a little Q&A time. So our first question is about the Rodenticide Bill. So this person's really excited about the bill. They feel like bait boxes have become so ubiquitous outside of businesses. So they're wondering how specifically would the passage of this Rodenticide Bill limit the deployment of bait boxes by pest control companies?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I also have a terrible habit of scanning for bait boxes whenever I go anywhere. And the good news is on those is that not all of the time the bait box actually has poison in them. Sometimes they're either using electronic rodent monitoring, which would alert the pest control operator if there's activity in the area, or there's a non-toxic bait block in there and they can check and see if there's been rodent activity. So keep that in mind whenever we do see those. Unfortunately, being a restricted use rodenticide, any any access by professionals will still be available. We did have in our amended language that we proposed and was voted on last week and was approved. It did have restrictions on the how you can use it, where you can use it, and when you can use it. Most likely that language is going to be missing, so we won't be able to slow it down in that capacity. I will continue this fight once we get the bill passed through the Department of Agriculture to work with them to get those restrictions on when, where, and how they can be used in place further down the road. But that's going to be a process. But I'm here. I'm going to be fighting for that all along. What we will see is, currently, even though the EPA through 2008 and through 2015, the EPA had phased out consumer use for second generation anticoagulants, but it wasn't an official restricted use status. So you could still purchase in bulk. You just couldn't buy small packages of them. And so if you go on Amazon today, you can order a 16-pound bucket of rodenticides, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that. So we'll get it out of the hands of folks that are using them there. Any agricultural producer that doesn't have a private applicator license is also not going to be able to use SCARs anymore after the passage of this bill as well. So we will see a lot of impacts both through consumer and agricultural use, but less impacts, unfortunately, for professional use.
Thanks, Mark. We also have some general advocacy questions around all of the bills. We're wondering if people can specify who we should reach out to when these bills are in the committee still. And they're wondering, do you reach out to your legislators from your home address, or you're reaching out directly to the committee, and just that whole process?
Well, it often depends on the timing of what's happening with the bill. So if bills are going to committee tomorrow, for instance, and in that case, the priority is reaching out to those committee members. However, another layer of that is if you happen to be in the district of one of those committee members, that call or written testimony or request for support is going to have more significance because legislators are more likely to listen to their constituents. So particularly if you live in somebody's district, you want to let them know where you reside so they know that you're a constituent. So that's one piece of it. Generally speaking, bills that we're supportive of, we encourage you to call or write to your legislators or even meet with them at any time during the session to let them know that you care about it so that it is on their radar, even if it's ahead of a particular vote. So, like I say, it depends on timing, but it's never a bad time to reach out to your legislators year round, really, because you want to be advocating for the issues you care about. I will often say, if you have a chance to speak to your legislators, just let them know you care about pollinators and native plants. We want them to hear that from lots of folks. I'm glad Lena also touched on how to put testimony together. That's really helpful. Was there another piece of it that I was meant to answer? Oh, in terms of calling about one or multiple bills at once, I think it can get a little confusing if you talk about multiple bills in one call, but you certainly can do that. But just be really clear with a bill title and a bill number and what your position is on that bill.
Thanks, Joyce. We have another question for Mark. Is there a chance of at least getting a requirement that pest control companies provide customers with written notification that the escars can harm wildlife? In this person's town, the city government and school district were told by the companies that big boxes with escars would not harm wildlife directly, and they made no mention of secondary harm.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I can't. We'll check with the bill sponsors to see if we can get that in there. We did have in the original bill language that anytime escars were used, that a sign would need to be posted, similar to how the little flags are whenever there's pesticides or herbicides used on a lawn that say, please keep your children and pets off of it. So in the amended form, that was removed, but I think this is a fair ask that I'll certainly bring to the sponsors and see if we can get that added in as we're working on further amendments.
Thank you. And I had one question for Lena. So we know that corn is wind pollinated, and I was talking to someone the other day about the Seed Act, and they were like, well, do bees even pollinate corn? Like blah blah blah. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more on like the systemicness of these pesticides and how, although like you don't think of a bee pollinating corn, how it really does impact them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as to whether bees pollinate corn, bees travel very long distances. And I've heard from some beekeepers that these pesticides are impacting their bees in so many different indirect ways, such that there are some plants that are being eroded away by other pest pressures, that neonics are killing those pests as well. And because of that, bees are actually forced sometimes to feed on corn, even though it's not something that they normally would go for. So I've heard that some of those anecdotal stories from beekeepers, but um, as for that's not always like the basis of the issue though, right? Because these pesticides are so widespread and they spread so far in the environment just by being systemic in nature. They can travel very, very long distances, not only just through soil and water, but even dust off is another issue with a lot of these seeds. Even the process of planting them into the ground, dust can come off of those seeds and get into nearby plants. So they're really just contaminating so much more, and bees are getting exposed not just through corn, but through the movement of those pesticides from the corn. That I think is the major driver here that we're also seeing.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So thanks again to all of our wonderful speakers. I think we all learned a lot today and definitely inspired me to take some action calling my legislators. And thank you all to who joined us today. We really appreciate you being here, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.